Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Tanner's Favorite Things. I'm Tanner Knight, and today we are going to be talking about this Yamaha 18-inch tom that I received as part of a full drum kit that I picked up recently. And this is kind of an orphan tom, and it's really been kind of abused, as you may have seen in the previous video. If you haven't seen that, I'll link it in the description below. But with this tom, I wasn't really prepared for the amount of surprises that I received when I took it apart. There were holes drilled pretty much in every location that you don't want them, with the one bit of good news, or the silver lining, being that they were at least all hidden by the correct size lugs. And the reason that these holes were drilled in the first place is because they didn't have the correct lugs when they went to rebuild this drum for some reason. So they had either, I think they were Mapex lugs for one half of it, and then the bottom half was just a generic, different size spacing lug. So they had to drill holes in both the top and the bottom. And on top of that, the legs, the mounts for the legs also have been re-drilled. But like I said, the good news is that it's all hidden by the correct sized hardware, and we'll go ahead and remount these holes on the top and plug them. I'm not going to address the holes for the leg mounts because they're too close to one another, and if I were to bore them out, it would just blow out the whole entire area. So I'm gonna have to live with those. But otherwise, the top set of holes will be plugged. The bottom set of holes, they were not drilled in the middle like they were on the top. They were just kind of bored out. The top hole was bored out a little bit. But again, it's not enough to plug and re-drill. So we're gonna plug the top set of holes, and that should be enough for this tom. So let's see the process. First of all, I cut a bunch of these little plugs out of a 1/2-inch dowel, and they're just, little thin plugs that will fit into a hole. So that's the size that we're going to plug, but these holes are slightly smaller. So I got a 1/2-inch drill bit in my Bosch drill, which was not powerful enough for this on the highest setting. I'd recommend a plug-in drill for this in the future, just because I did experience a little bit of tear out. This is really my first experiment right here on how this is gonna go. So I didn't do any taping. So I just went and drilled the hole kind of willy-nilly, and did get a little bit of tear out on both sides, but nothing terrible. Now I'm just dry fitting the plug to see if it's going to fit in there, which luckily all of these plugs fit perfectly. So the process from here is to affix a little bit of wood glue to the plug and then put it in the hole. So for the wood glue, I just picked up some Gorilla branded wood glue, and for the filler, I got some Minwax wood filler. So the process again is to glue the plug, but first you must tape the holes. So this is going to prevent a little bit of tear out, and I wasn't 100% successful with this method either, but taping it is definitely a lot safer than not taping it, both sides that is. But we're going to go ahead and glue this plug first before we bore out the rest of the holes and let this one set for a while. So just a little bit of wood glue on the outside. You don't need a ton. You don't want it dripping all over the place. So just a little bit of wood glue on the outer rim, and then you want to spread it around so it's nice and thin, and then pop her in the hole. This one took a little bit of maneuvering, but eventually it's seated right in there. Next, I just took a little damp paper towel and wiped off any excess glue here, and used that to position the actual final positioning, because it does have a little bit of compliance in there, and you want it to be mostly flush with the outside surface. So that's what I'm doing here, and then the wood filler will fill in the remaining back side of it. So that's, unfortunately, I couldn't address the color beyond that. You could probably get a black lacquer pen and black out these little dots, but you would really be doing it for no reason, because the lugs do hide the plug entirely. So there's no concern about it being seen. But you can see this one was a little tricky, but I did eventually get it seated in there and wiped off any of the excess glue. So next, I'm taping every single hole front and back. So you don't need to sit here and watch this whole process. I'll speed through it. But I'm just taking some standard painter's masking tape and taping the front and the back side of the hole. And if you're wondering, well, how are you going to see the hole? I did put my phone inside the drum to cast a little bit of light on there, and that allows you to see through it. So that's one trick, but you can just poke a hole in it and you'll be able to find it with your drill bit just fine. So here you're seeing me turn on my flashlight and just put it in the bottom of the drum, and that casts enough light so that you can see where to put your drill bit if there's any question about it. But I found it to be pretty easy even without the light. So now I'm just on the highest power setting of the drill so that it doesn't have a chance to slowly tear. You want to be pretty quick and surgical with this. And even still, you can get a little bit of tear up, but it's much, much better with the tape. So I'm just going to go ahead and drill all of these holes, and then we'll be ready to plug them. So all that's left to do now is remove the tape, and we can start plugging each individual hole. So the next thing to do is to apply a little bit of the Minwax wood filler to the back side and the front side of each plug. There's going to be a little bit of a gap in between kind of the outer surface and the plug on both sides, so you just need to fill it in a little bit. And it's easier to fill in the back side because that should be your larger cavity. The front side requires a little bit more precision and maybe a smaller dab at first, because you just want to get a little bit in there and not have it overtaking the lacquer in any way. So you can see I kind of smeared it a little bit and then cleaned it up, and that's pretty much the process that I followed for the rest of these. Just a little dab and then clean up the surface on the outside. So the back side, a lot easier, you can goop it in there, and then I actually chose to sand it down a little bit so I wasn't as precious with the surface on the back side, but that's the process moving forward. So here's a quick look inside the shell after I hit it with some 300 grit sandpaper, and it took a little bit of the excess ridges and just the offensive bits off of there, and it actually took a little bit of the finish off of the birch too. I'm not terribly concerned about that. You can see here a little tear out that I had to re-glue that we'll talk about later, but this is what it looks like. The plugs have dried and they're good to go. And we should be getting zero air escapage out of those center holes. Okay, now comes the fun part. Here is all of the hardware for this drum. Now comes time to assemble this dog and hear what she sounds like. Let's get to it. We're going to start with the leg mounts, so those will go on first. Again, these are brand new Yamaha tom leg mounts, so they're not period correct, but they are the correct spacing. And now we start with each top lug, and these are actually period correct 80s Yamaha 8000 series lugs. So I was really lucky to be able to source some of these for, they were actually the most expensive part of this build, so I'm not going to say for cheap, but it was nice to have the actual correct Yamaha period correct lugs. So really the only thing not period correct on this drum are the feet leg mounts and the actual legs, which again are Yamaha brand, but they are just brand new. Now we're obviously working on the bottom set of lugs. The original screws came with these lugs, which is nice. So once we have all of the lugs on, So before we put on the heads, I'm going to give each bolt, each screw, a final tension with the drill. And I set my clutch really low to about 1 or 2, and that way there's no chance of stripping out these screws. They are, you know, into wood, so you want to be fairly precious about it. Okay, now go the heads and the tension rods and the hoops, obviously. So this is the batter head, and I'm not going to spend too much time tuning this drum just because I think low and slow is its best option. But here goes the Evans Rezo head and the tension rods as well as the hoop. Just made it so the ripples kind of disappeared in either head. Now come the legs, and we're good to go. All right, let's hear what this beast can do. All right, so all in all, I would consider this a success. It was a little dicey at times, but now that it's all together and looking as clean as it has in many, many years, it's really a good-looking drum. The good news is that none of the holes, the additional holes that were drilled and couldn't be filled, are visible. So you cannot see any holes outside of the mounting hardware, the lugs, etc. And the plug job up top also similarly doesn't have any issues with regarding additional holes or just weird tear outs or anything like that. There were a couple tear outs, and welcome Jack. Hey buddy. Oh, he loves coming in and saying hello. What a good boy. There were a couple tear outs, the worst of which is over here. This one right here, I was able to glue back in place, but you can definitely see that it tore out just a little bit and it took some of the lacquer with it. It was a pretty clean break, so you really wouldn't be able to tell that from, I don't know, 4 or 5 feet away. But this is a used drum anyway, so it does have sort of evidence of use, and you can see kind of the outline of the original mount. That was one of the newer parts that I had to source for this drum, was just a newer Yamaha mount, but luckily they used the same 56 millimeter spacing. There are dings and nicks, so this is definitely a player's grade drum, but it's a whole lot nicer than it was when I received it with all of those mismatched lugs, the terrible feet and mounts. It was just a shell of its former self. So, as long as you don't have to look inside, and I would recommend getting a coated head or maybe like a chrome, something like that, where you can't see inside of this drum just to hide the filler that is covering the back of those plugs, then, you know, that might be a good option. But otherwise, it's a great looking, great sounding drum, one that's been brought back from near death. I would say if most people would have encountered this drum in the wild, they would have said, ugh, this is not the project for me. So I foolishly took it on and am very pleased with the results. It could have gone much, much worse. The chrome isn't perfect either. I did my best with it. I didn't want to put too much elbow grease into it and remove the chrome, so I just used soap and water and a rag, but you could probably remove some of that pitting. It's not too deep into the chrome. Here's another little spot that is just one tiny little nick outside of the lug, but really not bad otherwise. All right, so here I am situated behind the Yamaha YD7000 series kit with this 8000 series tom positioned in the floor tom spot. And yeah, it's 2 inches bigger than the 16-inch that was here. And I tried to record a sample of that 16-inch tom on video before I swapped this out, but apparently the camera must have died in between. So I'll give you the sound sample with just a still of the kit here just to compare this 16 against this 18 before we go full on into this 18-inch. All right, so just after playing this a couple seconds, I can tell it's way bigger than that 16-inch, just sound-wise. It just sounds massive. So let's go ahead and hear this 18 by 16-inch Yamaha 8000 series tom from 1989 in the context of a kit. All right, this tom is obviously bigger than the 16-inch tom that it replaced, and as such, it sounds bigger. It just sounds bigger than almost any 18-inch tom that I've heard up to this date. So it's loud, it's low, it's beefy. So this thing really wants to live with a bigger kit than this. This is a 22-inch kit with a 12 and a 13-inch tom. And I think this would be happier with a 13, 14-inch tom complement and a 24-inch kit, similar to my Superstar tom sizes. That would probably work out better. So maybe we'll hear this in the context of the Superstars. I'd like to do a head-to-head with all of my 18-inch toms. I have a 1980-ish Tama Superstar 18-inch by 16-inch tom, a 1983 Imperial Star, also Tama, 18 by 16-inch tom, and now this Yamaha 8000 series from 1989 to compare those against. So I'd like to do a head-to-head with those three toms here soon, but in the meantime, I'd love to know what you like. I'd love to know what you have to say. Do you like this tom better than the original? Do you like this tom at all? Do you think this was a worthy experiment? I would say having this tom finished is really kind of special for me because it's been sitting unfinished for about a month now in my house. And every time I look at it, I'm like, I gotta finish that. And I finally got to it, and I'm really pleased with the outcome. Of course, it's not perfect. It's not a mint condition 1989 tom. It's definitely player's grade. There's some extra holes that I didn't really feel comfortable addressing in the floor tom area, but otherwise I'm really happy with how the hole patches went, and having the actual original-ish hardware for this drum makes it look so good. And yeah, I'm super psyched to have this in my arsenal. So let me know what you think. Like and subscribe if you like this type of content, and hopefully I will see you on the next one.